In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
Hey everyone, this is Drew Hill with the Daily Memphian. I wanted to just jump on here real quick and let you know that we recorded this podcast on Tuesday morning. Tuesday afternoon, Taylor Jenkins talked publicly for the first time this summer at an event, and he did confirm that there will be a restructuring of his assistant coaching staff and that philosophical changes are a possibility for the team this offseason. Those are two things that Chris and I wondered out loud in the pod, but those have since been confirmed, and we wrote about them at the Daily Memphian, so you should go read about that. The other thing is this chatter that Taylor Jenkins could be on the hot seat for the Memphis Grizzlies. You might have seen my tweet. I tweeted out that I don't believe he's on the hot seat right now. That's just based on conversations that I've had with people around the team. I don't get the sense that the brass and the people in charge are dissatisfied with the job that Taylor Jenkins has done. I think that they view last season's injury-filled, affair as a pretty good excuse for having a bad record. So I think they viewed Taylor Jenkins as doing a good job so far. So we will see where it goes from here. I mean, I don't think any NBA coach is exempt from pressure altogether. If the Grizzlies were to get off to some disastrous start to start next year, or any playoff team or expected playoff team were to get off to a disastrous start, obviously the pressure ramps up pretty quickly. But the sense that I get is that they are pretty satisfied with the job in which Taylor Jenkins has done. They're looking mostly to make upgrades around his assistant coaching staff this summer, and think that those changes will probably improve the overall product. So we will see what happens on that front. We'll try to keep you updated on all the coaching changes and all the latest coaching rumors. But as always, thanks for listening and enjoy the rest of this podcast. Welcome back to another edition of the Daily Memphian's Memphis Grizzlies podcast. This is your host, Grizzlies beat writer Drew Hill, joined as always by Chris Herrington. This is a fun pod. This is a pod we do every year, or we have done every year for two years. This will be our third year doing it, probably.
Sounds about right.
We are going to give you our top draft prospects for the Memphis Grizzlies. Today, we will only focus in on the number 9 pick. We've spent quite some time building up these lists. I happened to walk into Starbucks this morning and immediately spotted Chris sitting in the corner.
Grinding tape. That's what us scouts do, we grind tape.
Yeah, I did get a peek at your laptop. You were watching Zach Edey highlights, so I found that to be interesting. I was wondering if that was a giveaway of your list in any way, which we will eventually get to. But no, we had the same idea, trying to put these these lists together at the very last moment. Before we get to that and draft stuff, I think we have a few other topics we need to discuss involving the Grizzlies and just the NBA overall. First topic is the coaching changes, because I feel like there has been a lot of chatter about this, and I feel like this podcast is kind of my way to get some of the specifics in the way that I feel out there as this sort of thing evolves. This started with, I think Sane might have actually rumored this on Twitter first. I can't remember.
I can't keep a running list of who says things first, so I have no idea.
The Athletic obviously reported that Taylor Jenkins had fired.
Mark Stein had hinted about this several weeks ago.
About it, yes. The Athletic, Kelly Iko, he reported that the Grizzlies had fired staff members. Then from what I had heard was that the Grizzlies were indeed bringing on new staff members, including one that has already been decided to be brought on, in Noah LaRoche, and that not necessarily this mass exodus hadn't happened from the coaching staff quite yet. But things were certainly being reshuffled and being decided as this thing sort of spins around. And I think we are still in that stage. But we also had a report from John Hollinger that he believes Taylor Jenkins could be on the hot seat this season simply based on the fact that assistant coaches have been fired. Now,
yeah, I mean, there's a fine line between a report and an observation. I think that's an observation.
I think that's an observation as well. Maybe report is not the right word.
Yeah.
Now, as of what I have heard most recently, and I know this may be a bit of a technicality, I still do not think that the Grizzlies have, quote unquote, fired a bunch of their assistant coaches. Have they made people aware that there will be new hires this summer and that roles are going to change? I think that is the case. Right. But I think right now we still haven't had that exactly happen. I do believe, and we questioned this the last podcast, will there be philosophical changes coming? I think that that's probably likely at this point, based on the sheer number that I think that they're going to bring in and therefore, see how others might circle out at that point.
To me, what's most, in terms of, to the degree that I don't think there are conflicting reports. I think there's a difference between factual and truthful sometimes. It could be a little bit of a gap between those two things. And it may be truthful to say they're firing all the assistants in some essential way, remains to be seen. But that does not seem to be quite factual yet, right? And if you are a beat writer covering a team like you are, you have to be exacting about what is factual and what is not factual. If you're a columnist from afar, you can just sort of cut to what you perceive to be the truth, And it'll all shake out one way or another, and we'll know what's going on.
Look, here's the bottom line. We know the Grizzlies are going to have a lot of new coaches next year.
Right.
Like that, there's no debate about that. How they are dismissing the coaches that they are dismissing and exactly which ones are not going to return in some capacity still remains to be seen and has not been reported.
I think what's most important about all that from an outside perspective, from a fan perspective, is what does that reflect about the team's approach on the floor? And B, what does that say about the stability of Taylor Jenkins as a head coach? To me, and I don't have answers to those questions, but to me, those are the two biggest questions.
Yeah. And I mean, I think when you do bring in a lot of staff members, you might be overhauling the staff a little bit. You are going to have philosophical changes on the floor, right? That's just part of what comes with a decision like that. So I do expect that will be the case to some degree for the Grizzlies. I mean, that's what you wonder initially, but
when it ties into what we're about to talk about in terms of the draft stuff, everyone knows the Grizzlies have this hole in their front court. Well, how you fill that hole is very related to what your philosophy of your basketball team is going to be, right? Because the kind of center that you play major minutes with is going to pivot your style one direction or another, more than maybe other positions would, right? If you're playing, a Jonas Valanciunas type 30 minutes a game versus if you're playing, a Kelly Olynyk type or whatever, it's a different style. Or if you're playing more of a Brandon Clark or whatever. Are they going to start with the talent and go from there? Or are they going to start with the philosophy and go try to find the talent that fits that? To me, I don't have an answer to that either, but that's an interesting question.
So we'll see what happens. We've discussed the different avenues quite a bit. All right, before we get to our players, we do have conference finals set.
Yep.
You've got Minnesota against Dallas. You've got Indiana against Boston. I was pretty surprised that Minnesota was able to pull that off after Denver had won all those games consecutively. They deserve that, though. I think when you win 3 games on the road in Denver, that's highly impressive. They had so many guys that were productive in different ways. And they're completely different teams and they're structured different ways. But it just goes to show you, I think, that there are multiple blueprints to winning in the Western Conference, and Minnesota seems to have found one.
Yeah, I'll be interested in how it carries over into this conference finals against Dallas. Minnesota's the higher seed. They'll have home court advantage. I do think they are the better team. But they were particularly sort of built matchup-wise to match up with that Denver team, as we saw in the playoffs last year when they gave them trouble. And you're coming off this this experience, a 7-game experience of beating that Denver team, is there a bit of a come down or a let up, or, are they going to be as primed going into this series against Dallas, coming out of what they just experienced against Denver? I'll be interested to see.
It's just amazing to me that Dallas finds themselves here again, because when I watch those games, they have talent, but so much of it is Luka just slowly dribbling the ball at the top of the key, and just doing it over again, and then do it again, and then do it again, and then do it again. It's like they have Kyrie, and unless Luka's off the floor, they don't even run the offense through him. It's bizarre.
I think it's a good team. I think that they made themselves better at the trade deadline, but they got they got a better draw too. They didn't have to play Minnesota or Denver to get there, right? You face a Clippers team with Kawhi Leonard's not right, in some cases just not there at all. And then you face a Thunder team that maybe was just not quite, they were the 1 seed, but they were just not quite ready for prime time yet,
I don't think the Thunder played well in this series. I think they're a better team than what they showed, first of all. Second of all, I do really wonder if Minnesota's, can foresee a scenario. I'm not saying it will happen. I'm just saying I can envision a scenario in which Minnesota runs them off the floor, because Minnesota's defense has been so good, and what Dallas does well is so repetitive, and it works, but I just feel like Minnesota's going to take it away, and they're going to have different answers.
They have defenders plural to throw at Luka.
Right.
They have Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards,
Yeah. So we'll see what happens. Other series, I don't think we expect it to be particularly competitive. Maybe it will be. But
it could be, but I think if Boston wants to back up what they've done all season, they should win it fairly handily.
Just give them one game.
Right.
Boston can take one game off. They win in 5, and then I hope we get Boston and Minnesota at this point. I think that would be the best matchup that we could possibly get.
Winner gets Garnett forever.
Yeah. Who do you think Garnett claims?
I think he won his title with Boston, and he had issues with ownership in Minnesota.
Probably.
But I think deep in his heart, it's Minnesota.
Like you. Okay. All right. How do we want to do this? We're going to move on. We're going to name our top 8 prospects. Do you care to set up how we decided to do this?
Well, let's say why we're doing 8. Grizzlies picked 9th. We're
Right.
doing 8 because we've decided, for the sake of making it a little bit easier, that we're not going to include Alexander Sarr, who I think we both have the sense from talking to people is the one player and maybe the only player who there's no scenario where the draft shakes out that he falls to 9. Doesn't mean he's going to go 1, but he won't be there at 9. And there's no one else in this draft, it seems, at the moment that you can categorically say is not going to be there at 9.
No, not categorically, but there are some that you feel.
Oh, they're unlikely. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I do think that Atlanta should take him number 1, first of all. I do wonder what Atlanta is going to do because before we get into this draft stuff, you mentioned the Jared Allen thing. Capella comes up a lot.
Right.
And if Atlanta does truly want to rebuild, is there any scenario in which they can make that work? The Grizzlies with Capella?
Sure. I'm not as into that as a trade option. The thing about trade for Jared Allen, they have similar salaries, right? So you're talking about similar trade constructions. With Jared Allen, I just think he's better, and he's under contract longer, and he's younger, and I'm more willing to give up what it takes to make the trade. The problem with the Grizzlies making a trade for a player of that salary size is they don't have enough bad contracts just to do salary match you don't care about. You're going to have to give up someone you care about, whether that's Marcus Smart or Luke Kennard or whatever. And am I willing to add extra stuff on top of a player of that caliber for Clint Capella? I don't know that I am.
Okay. So anyway, we'll see what Atlanta does, but I suspect that that's probably the direction that they will go. I think that's
right.
That's going to be the consensus by the end of draft season.
So before we get into the list, any quick notes from you about your approach?
My approach was I kind of knew the guys that I liked, and I had to figure out the order. I don't honestly love the draft class.
I don't either.
There's not too many players that I'm going to be super
There may be only 2 players
thrilled.
in this draft I really like.
Yeah. I mean, there's one player that I'm definitely higher on, a couple players that I'm higher on than others.
Right.
I would be pretty satisfied if the Grizzlies somehow still were picking in the first round, but later in the first round. because I think that you're going to get close to the same value on those guys as you're going to get at 9. Or at least the swings will feel similar, like in terms of you're trying to hit a home run. So my approach was kind of take these guys and try to figure out an order, and then also try to somewhat order it based on the likelihood that the Grizzlies could get that player. And then I almost just threw that out and said, forget it. There's no way I'm going to be able to fit all the great players in here and try to order by likelihood. So I just have them in order of who I like the best.
Yeah, I mean, the same. I did not really consider likelihood of being there at 9. I did not just do these are what I think are the 8 best players or prospects in the draft, setting Sarr aside. I thought about it in terms of the Grizzlies, in terms of who I would actually want to come out of this draft with for the Grizzlies, with the idea of I really want someone who can contribute to my team this year and next year.
I did the same. I should clarify.
And so my list is going to seem a little weird to people who are fluent in the mock drafts, maybe. I've got basically 5 guys on my list who are in the top 10 in most of the mock drafts, and 3 guys who are not in the top 10 in any of the mock drafts for the most part. And I'm not saying that the 3 guys I have on my list who are outside the top 10, I would definitely take at 9. What I'm basically saying is I like these 3 guys for the Grizzlies specifically. And if those other 5 on my list are off the board, I might take one of these guys at 9, but I'm really looking even more aggressively than ever to trade out or down or something, because I don't feel great about the other players who are going to be considered the guy you're supposed to take at that point.
Yeah, mine is is maybe a little bit more choose your own adventure. I think it's probably closer to the mock drafts perhaps than what you came up with. But there were some players where I had other factors considered that may have moved their position.
All right.
Then those factors change. So anyway, let's start with 8, and you can go first here.
All right. My 8 is a guy who may be a little off the board a little bit. I'm sort of surprised. This is a late breaking entry for me because I had not really looked at him much until recently, is Jacoby Walter, scoring guard at Baylor. His stats are a little troubling because he shot under 40% from the floor at Baylor, and he only shot like 34% from 3. When I look at the film on him, one of the things I like is that I feel like the shooting percentages are going to get better in the NBA when he's like a 3rd, 4th, 5th option and he's not having to take as tough a shot. But I think what I like about him, one thing I like about him is the versatility of the kind of shots his shot making versatility. You watch him, you'll see catch and shoot, deep 3, NBA range, looks good. You'll also see coming off a screen, coming around a curl, catch and shoot movement shooting, looks good. You'll see off the dribble, pull up, 3 pull up mid range, looks good. I sort of believe the shot making versatility is going to translate to the NBA. And then defensively, I don't know if he's going to be like a great defensive player, but I think he can be a plus defensive player in the NBA. He's 6'5", 6'10" wingspan, good defensive activity stuff in college. You watch him play, he's got a good build. He's not like super scrawny, he's got a good frame. I see a player who looks to me like could be like one of the comps you see is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. I could see that maybe a little bit better than that offensively, a little bit worse than that defensively. But in that range of a guy I can easily see being a mid-rotation player on a good team, a 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th best player on a team. Grizzlies don't have a screaming need for this player type, but I just feel better about him actually being a useful rotation player in the NBA than some of the other guys ranked higher at that 2-3 wing position.
We did not know each other's lists coming into this.
No, we have not compared notes at all.
It is funny because Jacoby Walter is probably the player that I felt more highly about than almost everyone. He's number 5 on my list.
That is surprising.
And the reason that I put him there is for all the reasons that you just said. I think you did a really good job of hitting on what I was going to hit on. I just think he's going to be a true NBA rotation player.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what you're searching for at this point in the draft, is somebody that you know is going to produce. There's a few things that you didn't say that, one is, and you mentioned the wingspan. I do think he's going to be a decent defender.
Yeah.
And he has positional size. And when we talk about players like, Reed Shepherd, players that don't have positional size, the Grizzlies don't have a ton of that, honestly, right now. Yeah. So to add a player that is going to be a plus in that way, I think is pretty important. He shot more than 6 threes a game last year. He shot 34%, but when you're shooting that much in college, and if you watched Baylor play a lot, we got to see them in the NCAA tournament here in Memphis, it was obvious that he was, they had Dexter Dennis as their point guard, who was a pass-first point guard, and it was on Walter to take a lot of the shots, and this guy's an 18-year-old freshman. I also just like his attitude. Like, the guy really cares. You see it. I had the chance to talk to him at the Combine. There is interest with the Grizzlies there. He said that the plan was to meet with the Grizzlies. He was one of the players that did announce that. He is a player opposite some of the other guard options that I think fits alongside the Memphis lead guards. Like, I can see him and Ja on the court together at the same time. I can envision that. I can't say the same about every single one of these guards. So for all the reasons that you just said, 80% free throw shooter, like, he's going to be a better three-point shooter than 34% in the league. I really like him, and I think he's a dog. I think he plays really hard. I love his attitude. He showed it at Baylor. I got to see it firsthand when I talked to him and watched him when I talked to him at the Combine and watched him here for the NCAA tournament. I think he's going to be a really good player. I can also say, I know our friend who also works for the Daily Memphian and the radio station, John Martin, is a big Jacoby Walter fan too. I just believe that he's going to be a good NBA player. And there's age value. Not that age value necessarily matters for the Grizzlies given their situation. So that gives me a little pause. Like, is he going to be ready right away when he gets in the league to contribute? But I think he's going to be a good NBA player. So
the free throw shooting was something I didn't mention that, but I noted that too when I was looking at his stats today. I was like, why is the shooting percentage so low? And that tends to be a good indicator. That's interesting. Who knew? You and I literally had never discussed Jacoby Walter with each other in any context.
Never.
So we come at this. Who knew Jacoby Walter would be an official prospect of the Daily Memphian Grizzlies podcast? I would never have guessed.
Okay, do you want me to go
who's your
number 8 here?
Yeah.
Zach Edey.
All right. I've got Zach Edey at 7, so that's a perfect time to talk about Zach Edey.
Edey is, obviously, we've talked about him a little bit. He's a highly efficient college player who dominated the paint, who believes he can do the same at the NBA level. He will not get the same sort of opportunity that he gets in college. He's going to match up against players of bigger size. I think that the one question I have with Edey that is a big one, and I guess this coincides with whatever the offensive philosophy is going to be for the Grizzlies moving forward. I would imagine they still want to play a lot in transition. He's not going to be a great transition player because he's not fleet of foot. And so I wonder how he fits in that way. But you could have said the same, with Steven Adams. So I don't know if that's too big of a question mark. But I like him as a prospect. This may be a little bit too soon, I think, to take a guy like Edey. It may not be. But I do think the Grizzlies are genuinely interested. I think they're doing their homework, and I think they should, because I think he's a good player that has physical tools that will clearly translate to the NBA. Where that fits on the Grizzlies roster, I think there are more question marks.
Yeah, after your cosign of Jacoby Walter, I sort of wish I had flopped these and I had Walter a spot ahead of Edey. I'd probably do that now. So my thing with Edey, it's almost more a commentary on what I think about this draft than anything else. And it's a commentary on, I may be overweighting the centers relative to what you see in these mocks, but part of that is, not that I think the Grizzlies need to get a center out of the draft, but I think there is a direct path to playing time for these players. I'm looking for guys who I think are going to help in the next couple of years. With Edey, I've thought this all season because he's a guy I've watched actually a ton. I didn't just start looking at him now, right? Even though I watched him some at Starbucks today. I just never, once I watched him play this season, and he got better because I watched him in person last season. I was there. I was sitting near courtside when they lost that 116 game in the NCAA tournament, the game before the Memphis game in Columbus. I was there. He really got better this season. Slimmed down, looked more explosive. And I just don't understand some of the dismissive, like Boban, Taco Fall, that kind of stuff with him. To me, he is much, much, much more likely to be a Jonas Valanciunas level player than a Boban Marjanovic. I'm sure I mispronounced that level player. Now, the Grizzlies sort of moved off of Jonas Valanciunas because they didn't want that kind of center. But at this point in a draft where I'm not in love with any of these guys, there's like two guys I really like. I just think he is very likely to be a quality scorer, rebounder, screen setting center who will be productive in a role. And I think there are limitations there. But if he's a guy who plays 25 minutes a game and puts up numbers and then he sits on the bench at the end when you're playing Jaren Jackson and Brandon Clark, I'm okay getting that with number 9 in this draft. And I think there's a very, very good chance he will step right in and be productive.
He's going to use his size to get rebounds.
Yeah.
He's going to set solid screens. You know those
Defensively,
things.
he's going to just play pure drop. But guess what? You're going to drop down and it's going to be a 7'5" dude with a 8-foot wingspan or whatever back there. And it's, I think he's a relatively safe pick to be a productive player in a rotation.
I do too. I like I said, my one hang up is are you going to be doing what you were doing in the playoffs against Minnesota where you were going with Brandon Clark and Jaren and you needed a little bit because you need to be thinking about players you can use later on down the line. I think I'll get into that later with some of these guys, but I think that's my one question is how do they envision using him? Because that's pretty important. It's pretty one-dimensional the way that you're going to be able to use him.
Yeah. So. All right. So that was your number 8 and my number 7. So who's your number 7?
Dalton Connect.
Okay. Not on my list. So the floor is yours.
Barely made my list. I have a feeling one of these players I'm going to get a lot of heat for leaving off. But anyway, I just wonder if this is the type of player the Grizzlies would add if the decision is not to bring Luke Kennard back next year, just because he's an instant offense scorer. We know he's going to shoot the ball well at the next level. He can finish around the rim. He can score at all 3 levels. I think all of that is important. And when he's on the court with guys that can create their own shot, whether that be Dez or Ja, I think he would be a valuable offensive asset. There are a lot of questions about whether or not he will hold up defensively.
Right.
And I think all those questions are fair. But if you just need a player that's going to bring you some of similar value to Kennard, but maybe a little bit better getting to the basket, I'm not saying he's going to shoot 40% from 3, but I suspect he'll shoot 35 to 37% from 3 at the next level. If that's what you're getting, I think he could be a useful piece, especially if you're going a different route to adding a big man to this roster. He could step into a Kennard role and I think do a pretty good job, although having him and Ja out on the floor defensively at the same time is a little bit of a liability, so that makes me nervous. But it's the same thing with Kennard. It's not like Kennard's a plus defender either. So I view him more as a replacement player. I wouldn't draft him and keep Luke Kennard. I don't think that would make any sense. But he's on the list because I do think he could be a microwave scorer off the bench for some NBA team. And he's a little bit older. He's a little bit more experienced. The game's a little bit more polished than some of the other young guys. And if you bring in a player like that, then I think it's a little bit safer bet that they can help you the first 2 years. And I think that matters for the Grizzlies.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've not watched a lot of Connect. Maybe I would change my tune if I spent more time with him. One of the comps I've seen is Corey Kispert, shooter for Washington Wizards, who was a 4-year college guy. That makes sense to me, and that wouldn't be a terrible guy to get at number 9 in this draft as a guy like that. My thing with Connect is I know he performed well at the Combine, but the athletic markers in terms of his production are pretty meager for someone who was that old and that experienced in college basketball. I feel like as a perimeter player, particularly, as a 23-year-old perimeter player in college basketball, I feel like that stuff, the steal, the block, the rebound, that kind of stuff should just show a little bit more. So I'm a little skeptical of him. I worry there's a high level of just a guy once you get to the NBA level in terms of NBA athleticism.
There were questions about him being that when he got to Tennessee from wherever I forget where he was playing before, but it was a mid-major.
Northern Colorado, I think.
Yeah, something like that. And it translated right away in the SEC. He was the best scorer in the conference. I think offensively he will be a good player. But like I said, I think there's kind of a niche here that he fits, and like the Grizzlies have to decide that that's the direction they're going, I think, in order to make the pick make sense.
Right.
But they might choose that path. So that's why he made my list.
All right. My number 6 is someone I'm guessing is probably not on your list. This is my big reach, and that's Kyle Filipowski from Duke. And you talk about like questions about athleticism translating, he's got them. And I think the fact that his wingspan is probably going to be a negative wingspan once you get the in-shoes measurement on height. His wingspan, his standing reach is pretty meager. I think if you're drafting him to be a traditional starting center who anchors your defense, that's something you should not do as an NBA team. I think for the Grizzlies specifically, you wouldn't be drafting him to play that role. You'd be drafting him as a combo big playing alongside another combo big who happens to be Jaren Jackson Jr., who's one of the best rim protectors in the league. And so what I like about Filipowski is, to me, he has elevated dribble, pass, shoot skills as a 7-footer. And I can see him playing a role, a secondary role around the 3 stars where he's picking and popping, he's running dribble handoffs, he's making passes out of the high post. He's just in the flow. He can play in the flow in a way I don't think Zach Edey can play in the flow as just a cog on a team. I think he can play on the flow and play on the perimeter and play in space on both ends of the floor, because I think he defends pretty well on the perimeter for a guy that size. I see him as, sort of a Kelly Olynyk type with a better defense, a guy who can just play in the flow and knock down shots and move the ball and give the Grizzlies more general size in their rotation in a way that can just sort of fit into a team context. Would I take him at 9? I don't know if I take him at 9, but again, the 5 guys I haven't gotten to yet, if those 5 guys are gone, I don't love anybody and I'm looking to trade.
Yeah. So he's not on my list, but he is in my top 10 here because I had a few other players. Like, I was going back and forth on 8 for a while, and I put Edey there, I'll be honest, in part because he's the best talking point of all these players. Bobby Klintman I like from the NBL. I don't know if did you do any research on him at all?
Not much, no.
6'10", is very young, is a little raw, smooth with a shot, isn't a great statistical shooter, think he has very high upside, and like is the type of player that we talked about with Sarr that's like long, athletic, can pass, like that the type of player that NBA teams are searching for, a little bit further off. I just like him as a prospect. I think somebody's going to get a good draft pick later on with him. So he was in that mix. Filipowski was in that mix. And Edey was in that mix. I wrote down for Filipowski. I actually, if you read my piece in which I talked to him, I actually agree with him that he could be one of the most important players in the draft when it comes to being paired with the dynamic backcourt.
Which the Grizzlies have.
Because he is a good screen setter and he can relocate and he can pick and pop. And I think there are a lot of ways that he plays really well along with those guys.
Right.
And he would allow the team to play 5 out, which fits sort of what they wanted to do last year.
I like the offensive fit with him as a secondary player.
My question is, obviously that doesn't solve the Grizzlies' big man problem. Like to me, that can't be your only solution. I just don't think that that's going to work. Is he too similar to Santi?
Well, he'd almost be a Santi replacement because Santi's heading towards needing a new contract, right? So it would almost be that.
Yeah. Well, that's what I wrote down. Too similar to Santi. And then I wrote down, I think there is a scenario in which the Grizzlies like him. I just think he didn't make the cut for me. But I could see him being the type of player that the Grizzlies like.
Right. Who you got at 6?
At 6, I have Stephon Castle.
Interesting.
Is he on your list?
He is. I'll let you do your case for Castle first.
I have been outspoken about thinking that Stephon Castle has a skill set that's going to translate really well to the NBA. I like the fact that he went and played a role at UConn and sacrificed and won a national championship and helped them win. I love him defensively. I think he's an absolute dog. I think he guards extremely well. If you watch what he did in the NCAA tournament, the best perimeter players in the country couldn't score on UConn when he was out there and defending them. He has great positional size. He rebounds the ball really well. I wonder I think he's going to shoot better. I do wonder if it's a Vince and Marcus type of thing, but would Would Marcus potentially move out in trying to add a big? I think there are questions there. My one hang-up with Stephon Castle, and this is the reason why he's down here, because he would be much higher for me. He made it abundantly clear at the Combine, I'm a point guard, and I'm going to play point guard. And yeah, I sacrificed in college, but this is my career we're talking about, and I'm going to be a point guard. And that's just the way that it's going to be. Now there's rumors that he doesn't want to work out for teams that already have star point guards in place. I don't know if there's any truth to those or not. But to me, if that's the way it's going to be, and like he's not going to be excited about coming in here, and he wants to play point guard, and it's not, and there's even going to be a question about his happiness on a team you're trying to win with right away. To me, that knocks him down a few pegs here.
That's a very valid thing. I thought about that. I decided to ignore it, perhaps wrongly, because I just think, do you want to win? I think he wants to win. You're not going to go be a starting point guard and win next season or the year after. Maybe you think otherwise, but you're just not. And I think he has the capability, as he showed at UConn, to fit into a winning system in a variety of ways. I actually have him number 1.
Wow. Okay.
And it's not because I'm not planting a flag. I think Stephon Castle is going to be a big star. I don't feel that way about a single player in this draft. I do think he is the one player, I might even include Sarr with this, even though we have him off the board. He is the one player, and I'm not certain about anyone, but I am the most certain will be a quality rotation player in the NBA. I think he is the easiest. I'm going to say something slightly different about a different player that will sound in conflict, but I've thought it through and it's not. I think he is the clearest path to being a quality rotation player in the NBA because I think he will be a plus defender across multiple positions. He can dribble, he can pass, he can process, he can play off the ball, he can play on the ball, he can cut. He's just a good all-around basketball player. The question is the shooting. And
it's such a low volume, it's hard to know.
Well, to me, the shooting question with him is less, or can you shoot well enough to be a good player? It's, can you shoot well enough to be more than a good player? I think he will shoot well enough, given everything else he can do. I think the worst case scenario for him as a shooter is that he is Marcus Smart, right? Well, Marcus Smart is viable. He shoots 32, 33% from three, not 22, right? He has good games, he has bad games. I think Castle will probably be a better shooter than that, but maybe not. And that limits the upside if the shooting doesn't come around. But I think he's so good at so many other things. I just feel really comfortable that he's just going to be good. I'm more comfortable that he will be good than any other player in the draft.
I do think, wow.
And that's all.
I don't know if I feel that strongly.
And in this draft, I don't believe in anyone as a surefire star.
I don't know if I believe that strongly in him, but I do believe that he has a better chance than not to be a good player.
Right.
Again, and maybe I'm overreacting. And also, maybe he's saying that in front of the media, and if he got in front of actual teams that say that, hey, we're competitive and we really like you,
right,
he might say something differently. Part of it is that it was said to me. I was the one asking the question, and that's just hard for me to just discredit.
No, I didn't think I was going to end up with Castle number 1 on my list. It was more of a process of elimination, frankly.
Yeah. But it was just interesting that that's the way he views himself. And I mean, is there a scenario in which he gets to play on the ball a little bit if he's on the Grizzlies? I think.
Yeah. I mean,
yes.
we're talking about Scottie Pippen Jr. on a two-way contract playing backup point guard minutes on this team.
You got Bane playing backup point guard.
Yeah, but I mean, Marcus Smart's got 2 more years on his contract, could get traded. Luke Kennard's got 1 more year on his contract. I think there's room for a player of his versatility.
Yeah. Well, Vince also
can play on the ball. Yeah.
Can play on the ball. So they have options.
Yeah.
And who knows with that.
All right. So you had Castle at 6, Adam at 1. We're back to
so
B.
You're up at 5.
Back to B at number 5.
5 is gone.
Yeah. Your 5 is Jacoby Walter. So at 5, I've got, and I'm surprised I have this player this high. He moved up the more I looked. Again, more process of elimination. I've got Zachary Ricochet at number 5. There are things I'm concerned about, not sold about, but the Grizzlies' 2 biggest needs, setting aside like you need a center, but in a broader sense, we talk about it. They need just more size, period, and they always need more shooting. And I think Ricochet seems to be the best combination of size plus shooting in the draft. This is a 6'10" guy who can stroke it from 3. He's not a total stiff athletically. He can finish above the rim. He can attack a closeout. Seems like he could be at least average defensively. I worry about the toughness from what I see, and I don't know if he can do much with the ball other than like one dribble and get to the rim. But a 6'10" guy who can run the floor and knock down threes, like in this draft, Grizzlies could use that.
Yeah, he's number 2 for me.
Yeah.
And the reason is because, again, as we were talking about, Grizzlies need positional size. They need bigger players on the floor. He's shooting 47% from 3 this season. That's not an accurate number, 72% from the free throw line, which is always a good thing to look at when you're trying to decide what's real and what's not. I question how real the three-point shooting is, but I do like the idea of the Grizzlies adding somebody that can be big and tall and also be a playmaker, because when the ball swings to the corner and the defense has to over-adjust, I feel like that's something that they've been lacking. I look at him and say, can he be like Josh Giddey that can play defense? Like, that would be a plus. And I think that's not necessarily a skill set that the Grizzlies have right now.
I don't see the same kind of ball handling passing in his bag, as they say, as Giddey, but I see a lot better shooting, and I think that's probably more important.
Right. Well, okay, what about like Michael Porter Jr.?
No, that's the comp people make. Yeah. And I kind of, Michael Porter Jr. may be my least favorite player in the entire NBA to watch, but I don't recoil quite as much. And something about Porter Jr. shooting for him. He's a good shooter, but I don't like to watch him shoot. I don't get that vibe of Ricochet. I'm fine watching him shoot. But like, guess what? If you can get Michael Porter Jr. in this draft at number 9, like, you should do it,
He's won't be there.
Right.
The truth is, he's too
unlikely.
Big. But if you've got a chance to add a tall player with a big wingspan that shoots the ball well from 3, like, every NBA team needs that. Like, and again, I don't think he's this good of a 3-point shooter as he's shown this season, but I think he's a good enough 3-point shooter where he's a very obvious dude that you would pick if you're there at the Grizzlies and he's still available. To me, I feel that way.
So I had Ricochet at 5. You had him at 2. We've already done your 5, Jacoby Walter. That's back to me at 4. This guy will definitely be on your list. He's either going to be 4, 3, or 1. We'll find out. And he fell a little bit from me. The more I look, the more concerned I am. But I still have him at 4. And that's Donovan Clingan.
Yep, that's my number 1.
Your number 1. So I'm going to cede the floor to you since you have him 1.
I think this, I understand why people have questions about it, because he's not a great shooter. He didn't test well in terms of like moving his feet. But if you're looking for the Steven Adams archetype, as the team themselves said after that trade, I just don't think you're going to find a player that more fits that role than a guy like Donovan Clingan. He does everything highly efficiently. We know the Grizzlies have drafted players like him in the past that are a little bit more experienced college players that jump off the page in terms of efficiency numbers. I think defensively, he's going to bring a presence. He's going to rebound the ball. I stood next to him at the lottery, and like, I felt the same way about Edey, but I was stunned at how big Clingan was. I just wasn't prepared for him to be quite that big. So he's even bigger in person, like felt much bigger than when I stand next to Jaren, which I think is notable. And to me, he's just the clear piece that if you're looking for the most convenient, obvious thing to do this offseason, if you're looking to take the easy route and try to find a way to add a big to this roster, he's the single big in this draft that I trust the most. I think he's going to block shots at the next level. I think he's going to shoot the ball maybe a little bit better than he did in college. But he does the things that you need him to do: screen setting, passing, and rebounding and shot blocking. And if he does all of those things and that's what he can bring to the table in the NBA, then he's, in my opinion, the perfect fit for the Grizzlies. He won't be there though. He won't.
Probably not. I've seen multiple mock drafts that have him there at 9, but I don't believe that's going to happen. I said I thought Castle had was the most likely player in the draft, maybe even including Sarr, who was set aside, to be a quality rotation player in the NBA. Slight variation. Clingan has the clearest path to being a top 15 player at his position in the NBA. To be a top 15 center, you don't have to be an all-star. Yeah, give me Jakob Poeltl. You can be a Vika Zubic.
Jakob Poeltl would be great on the Grizzlies.
This is what I'm saying. I think the path for Clingan to be a top 15 player at a position of the greatest need for the Grizzlies is pretty good. And that is not only is that worth taking at 9, it's worth taking in the top 5 in this draft to me. So I'll start with the good on Clingan. I believe completely in him as a paint defender, protect the rim, defensive anchor in the paint. And that's probably the single most important thing to have at the position. And I think he can be all NBA level defender as a paint defender. I also like that he can pass the ball. He's not going to be Marc Gasol, Nikola Jokic, but he could be Steven Adams, you know? The Steven Adams comp is really a good comp for him, including down to I don't know if he's going to be able to score. But Steven Adams doesn't score either. He helps your team score. I think Clingan's post game is rough. I'm not convinced he's going to be able to shoot. Other than offensive rebounds and catching lobs, I don't know how much he'll score. But if you got John Morant, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson and Gigi Jackson, maybe that's fine. I wonder about him a little bit. As effective as he was, it looks like he needs to get stronger and a little bit more together physically.
I would agree with that. Yeah.
But maybe he will, right? Zach Edey played 4 years in college. Donovan Clingan played 2 and had injury problems and what have you. And so I don't love Clingan. I think he might just be Walker Kessler with better passing. But guess what? If you told me I could have Walker Kessler with better passing, I'll take him in this draft.
I would take Walker Kessler.
I'd take Walker Kessler without the good passing at number 9.
Without the good passing.
No, I'd probably trade.
Think all those.
This is a good point.
The Grizzlies just need a center that can rebound and set screens and pass
That's
a little
good point.
bit.
If my top 5 guys are off the board, I would trade the number 9 pick just for Walker Kessler. So if I can get a better Walker Kessler, which I think Clingan is going to be, yeah, I agree. I don't have him number 1, but I do have him number 4.
Okay, my number 4 was Ron Holland.
I'm surprised. So we're not going to have a lot of variation. I thought Holland was going to no-show on your list. I have him at 3.
There's a big name that's obviously going to no-show on my list. I think that Hollinger has helped convince me a little bit here because he wasn't initially in the list of players that I liked right away. I do see the defense translating and positional size, which we've said 100 times. Positional size comes in play. His body's a little bit more ready for the NBA right now than some of the other wings. And so I think all of that helps. Questions about the three-pointer. The 3 doesn't necessarily look that great coming off the hand.
It does not.
I also wonder if maybe the Grizzlies or myself just a little gun shy here because I do get a little bit of Zaire Williams vibes. Not offensively. I think he's a slasher. He's stronger and not necessarily defensively, but a player with shooting questions that's of that size and plays that same position.
He is more built at age 18 right now than Zaire Williams is at age 23.
That is true. That is true. But I don't know why, but there's a little fear there. But anyway, adding a player that can play defense and can play in transition with Ja is clearly good, is clearly a plus. And I think he would be better at doing so than a player like Zaire Williams has so far. But I don't know if I'm 100% sure of that.
Yeah.
And he's just, to me, when you're drafting players that aren't good shooters, it is a risk.
So I had Clingan at 3 and I had Holland at 4. And then I watched more Clingan this morning and began to wince at some of the stuff. And then I flipped him. Maybe I should have it back. Maybe I should have Holland at 4, just like you do. I have him at 3. I think the shooting concern is very real. And the Grizzlies need shooting. You're really going to add another non-shooter to the team who plays on the perimeter.
That's a big part of this.
But I love defense. I love adding. Again, we just talked about Minnesota being able to throw Anthony Edwards and Jaden McDaniels out in playoff series. Let me throw Ron Holland and Vince Williams Jr. and Marcus Smart. To me, you can't. People say you can't have enough shooting. Can't have enough dogged perimeter defenders in this NBA. I love the athleticism. I think the Grizzlies could really use more. They've gotten less athletic, as the roster has changed. Give me guys who could run the floor and catch Ja's lobs and really get out and get after it in transition. And I like the doggedness of this guy, just to attack the rim ferociously. So I'll take the athleticism and the defense and the demeanor that he has at that age and roll the dice with it in this draft.
The thing about the wings is just finding places that they fit,
Right.
Because if Marcus is still on the roster and Vince is still on the roster, and you're adding a non-shooter, how much is that player going to be of use? I think there are questions about that, But
so we're missing your number 3 and my number 2, and I'm going to guess it's the same person. Who do you have at number 3?
did we both throw Topic out of this top?
Apparently
list?
so. Who you have at 3?
Reed Sheppard.
That's who I have at 2.
You can have the floor since you had him higher than I did.
I think Reed Sheppard, from what I can gather, expert as I am on this draft, I think Reed Sheppard is the best offensive player in this draft. Not the best player, because there's 2 ends of the floor, and Castle to me is his range of what he can do and the physical gifts are. But I think Reed Sheppard is the best offensive player in this draft. I think he's an absolute banger of a shooter all over the court from what I can see. He shot 50% from 3 in college, but you watch the film, it's like he's squared up drilling shots all over, everywhere, all over the place. I think he's a good ball handler. He's a good passer. I think he's really a point guard, but he's a point guard who shoots it so well and is so active defensively, you can play him off the ball with a point guard. So do I think it's ideal to play John Morant and Reed Sheppard together? I don't think it's ideal, but I think Sheppard shoots so well and gets after it so much defensively that it's going to work. I think the pluses will outweigh the minuses in that configuration. And do I think Reed Sheppard would look good with Desmond Bane? I think he would look spectacular with Desmond Bane. I love that idea of that backcourt. And so I just think he is so talented. To me, he's like, if TJ McConnell had hops and shot the ball like Steve Nash, it's like that kind of player. And is that the perfect fit for this Grizzlies team? No. But I'm looking for guys who I think are going to be good. And him and Stephon Castle are the 2 guys I'm most sure are going to be good.
He has a lot of things that I think you can't teach. I mean, the guy was nails late in games for Kentucky too. Like, you can't, and just not to get all Kentucky on people because I'm from there. Like, to be the son of Jeff Sheppard, who was played at Kentucky during their heyday when the team was awesome, and to be a recruit that was ranked towards, I think outside of the top 70 or around the top 70 of his class, and to have all this pressure coming into school and to live up to all those expectations and more and just be totally awesome all year long is really impressive before you get to the basketball stuff, just the pressure of that situation. I think that I wrote down here, I'm starting to believe that there's no chance that Reed Sheppard gets to Memphis, and maybe we could have put him on the same list as Sarr. And the reason that I feel that way is because initially I was like, wow, his game kind of fits really well for what Memphis needs. He'll be able to handle the ball. He can play backup point guard.
Right.
He can pass it. He can shoot it. He's disruptive defensively. We know Memphis's defense is predicated on activity and transition, and like, this guy's perfect. He's a perfect fit for the Grizzlies. Well, guess what? If you can do all those things, you're a perfect fit for every single team. So I think any team could envision themselves drafting a player like Reed Sheppard. So for that reason, I'm starting to believe there's going to be no chance he gets there. But I just really, I think if you can add a shooter that's that good, and I agree with your take on Bane, I think he would be awesome next to Bane. It's a big help. Now, the one question is the size, and I did have somebody sarcastically tweet at me the other night as Minnesota was winning with their bigs on the floor.
Yeah.
Like, good idea, take the 6'1" point guard out of Kentucky.
But the draft is the draft,
Right. Yeah, you don't have to fix your big problem in the draft. You can fix your big problem somewhere else, and if you feel strongly that Reed Sheppard's going to be a good player, and no one has a better feel for the game in this draft than him, then take a player like Reed Sheppard. I do wonder, you're not going to take Reed Sheppard, keep Luke Kennard, and add a big unless you're making a big trade.
Yeah, I agree.
That's not going to happen. So it's kind of Sheppard or Kennard for me, but if you have a chance to draft Reed Sheppard, I would feel great about them doing so.
The only 2 players under consideration for us on the list that I feel pretty strongly are going to be good are Stephon Castle and Reed Sheppard. And so I got them as the top 2 guys. I have the least doubt. Not no doubt. There's doubts about Castle shooting, doubts about Sheppard's size. I just think they're so good at so many other things they're going to overcome those things.
Okay. Last thing. We got to go quick because I got to get to a Grizzlies event.
We had a lot more overlap than I thought. Only 9 total players on our list and the same top 4 in different order.
It's shocking that we both
great minds, etc.
I thought you were going to leave Topic out, Nikola Topic.
Yeah.
I question if he's a fit for the Grizzlies. He plays a point guard. He's big, which is great.
He's a ball-dominant playmaker with questions about defense and shooting. Grizzlies got that box checked.
Right. So I don't, talk about Giddey. We made the Giddey comparison. That's more Giddey, who's being played off the floor or got played off the floor in the playoffs. So didn't love that.
Dillingham.
Kalel Ware.
I thought about Kalel Ware. I entertained that.
It scares me that he's not a great screener, and that's like pretty dang important.
Yep.
I actually watched a lot of Kalel Ware this season. He's definitely a plus in athleticism. He's able to shoot threes. I'm not sure he's going to rebound and screen that. Right. He's not going to bring that to you, at least initially right away, because he's not that built yet. He's not that strong. So for me, it was a pass.
Yeah, I just think Filipowski's more solid, but skill-wise. I was looking at both of those guys, and I like Ware as like a lob threat for Ja, and I think that's important, but only so important. I worry about the solidity of him a little bit. I do think he is better. Like some mocks have him as the second round or have had him as the second round, and I don't see that, So I considered him. Dillingham's the other guy who's in the top 10 in a lot of mocks we didn't include.
He's too similar to Ja.
Yeah, again, a wispy small guard who can get crushed on picks and have trouble defending. The Grizzlies have that box checked too.
Eve Missy, too much of a project.
Yep, I agree.
We don't need to spend.
Well, Bezelis is the other one that's in the top 10 of a lot. I think he's too much of a project.
Too much of a project.
He's too uncertain.
Cody Williams is another one that's up there. Yeah. Jalen Williams' brother. I just don't know what he does that well.
If you told me he's going to blossom and be really good, I'd believe you. But he has to blossom. Like it's not there right now.
There's nothing he does exceptionally well right now. I mean, I watched him a decent amount, especially through that NCAA tournament. I watched all the Colorado games. Not a good 3-point shooter. Not very strong. Not an above the rim guy. I don't see it with him. I'm going to be honest. I wouldn't.
He has to become better than what he is now.
Yeah, I would not spend a lottery pick on a player like that. But I think that's it. That's our list. Do you want to read over the list one more time?
Yeah, we'll do it real quick. So my list, I had Stephon Castle at 1, Reed Sheppard at 2, Ron Holland at 3, Donovan Clingan at 4. We'll break there and go to your list because you had the same 4 players in a different order. You had Clingan at 1. No, not the same 4 because Ricochet. Okay. I had Castle 1, Sheppard 2, Holland 3, Clingan 4, Zachary Ricochet 5, Kyle Filipowski, that's the difference, at 6, Zach Edey at 7, Jacoby Walter, official prospect of the pod, at 8. You had Clingan at 1, Ricochet at 2, Sheppard at 3, Holland, a surprise at 4, Walter, a surprise at 5, Stephon Castle at 6, Dalton Connect, your outlier, at 7, and Zach Edey at 8.
Yeah. The one thing I might change is I might move Castle up, but it's just hard for me to get the idea that he desires so badly to be a point guard and there's no space for him there. But I would agree with you that I think he's one of the better players in the draft. And I've been saying so on Twitter. So if you follow me, then you've been seeing that. All right, well, that's going to do it for us this week. We'll be back. We may come back with some second-round players that we like. The Grizzlies have 2 second-round picks this year. Probably not going to use both of them.
Oh, I think they might, but they won't. Even if they do, they won't roster both of them.
Yes, that's true. Not going to roster both of them. Could be two-way guys,
right,
too.
Right.
So we may come back with players we like later on down the road. But until next time, for Drew and for Chris, we're out of here.